My name is Vernon, and I'm 58 years old. Life deals you strange cards sometimes. I work my fingers to the bone for my children, one who silently strived, and another who basked in my constant approval. When my daughter's wedding came around, I gave my son an ultimatum he couldn't refuse: attend or lose his tuition. What I didn't know was that he had already graduated top of his class, and my threat meant nothing. Before I tell you how my own ultimatum became my greatest regret, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if my story resonates with you. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood in Detroit where hard work wasn't a virtue. It was just what men did. By the time I was 30, I had established myself as a respected construction foreman in Michigan, working 60 to 70 hours weekly to provide for my family. We weren't rich by any means, but we lived comfortably in a modest 3-bedroom house with a small yard that my wife Sarah lovingly maintained. Sarah was the light of my life, compassionate, intelligent, and the perfect mother to our 2 children. James was our firstborn, a thoughtful, serious boy who seemed to absorb the world around him with quiet intensity. 2 years later came Tiffany, a bright-eyed, spirited little girl whose laughter could fill a room. We were happy, despite the financial struggles that sometimes kept me awake at night. Then came the diagnosis that shattered our world. Sarah's stage 4 pancreatic cancer moved with brutal efficiency. Within 8 months, she was gone, leaving me alone with 12-year-old James and 10-year-old Tiffany. I was completely unprepared for solo parenthood while drowning in medical bills and grief. "You need to be strong for those children," my father told me at the funeral. "They've only got you now." Those words haunted me as I struggled to balance my grief with the immediate needs of 2 devastated children. I took on additional side jobs working maintenance shifts on weekends and doing private contracting jobs in the evenings. Sleep became a luxury as I tried desperately to maintain some semblance of financial stability. Something shifted in our family dynamic during those dark days after Sarah's death. Tiffany, with her mother's expressive eyes and infectious smile, became increasingly emotional. She would cry at bedtime, have meltdowns before school, and cling to me whenever I was home. Her neediness pulled at my heartstrings. Here was my little girl so obviously broken without her mother. "Daddy, please don't leave me too," she would sob, wrapping her small arms around my neck. How could I not respond to that? I found myself rearranging my schedule to attend her school events, sitting through dance recitals and spending precious dollars on the dresses and toys she said would make her feel better. Each smile I coaxed from her felt like a victory against the grief threatening to consume our family. James, meanwhile, retreated into himself. Unlike his sister's expressive suffering, my son's grief manifested in silence. He became fiercely independent, making his own lunches, completing homework without prompting, and rarely asking for anything. I mistook his self-sufficiency for emotional resilience. "James is fine," I would tell concerned teachers and neighbors. "He's always been the responsible one." What I didn't realize then, what would take me decades to understand, was that James had simply learned that his needs came second. He watched as I doted on his sister, as I stretched myself thin, responding to her every crisis while barely acknowledging his achievements. There was the time 14-year-old James won the state science competition. I missed the award ceremony because Tiffany had a minor case of strep throat and didn't want to be left with a babysitter. I told myself James would understand. He did, nodding stoically when I explained my absence, his certificate tucked quietly into his backpack. Then came high school, where the disparities in my parenting became even more pronounced. When Tiffany maintained a B- average during her sophomore year, I rewarded her with a used but reliable Honda Civic. "You've been working so hard, Princess," I told her as I handed over the keys. "You deserve this." Meanwhile, James maintained perfect grades while working part-time at the local library. When he graduated as valedictorian, my gift was a secondhand laptop for college, a practical necessity rather than a celebration of his achievement. I remember the look in his eyes when he thanked me. Not disappointment, which I could have recognized, but something far more painful: resignation. Tiffany mastered the art of emotional manipulation with stunning precision. She learned exactly when to deploy tears, when to invoke her motherless status, and when to praise my sacrifices. Each time I responded exactly as she hoped, providing money attention or exceptions to rules. I told myself I was helping her cope with losing Sarah. In reality, I was creating a monster of entitlement. "Dad, you're the only one who really understands me," she would say, expertly stroking my ego, while her brother quietly washed the dinner dishes alone. As the years passed, James spoke less at family gatherings. He became a ghost in our home, present, but unseen. I rarely asked about his hopes or struggles, assuming his independence meant he didn't need my attention. When he did try to share his interests or concerns, Tiffany inevitably interrupted with some urgent crisis that required immediate attention. "Dad, I know James was talking about his scholarship application, but I just got invited to Brittany's lake house and I have absolutely nothing to wear." And just like that, James's moment would evaporate as I reached for my wallet to solve Tiffany's emergency. I failed to see the damage my favoritism was causing. I was blind to the quiet dignity with which my son accepted his secondary status in my heart. It shames me now to admit how thoroughly I failed to see him. When James received his acceptance letter to the University of Michigan's engineering program, I felt a complicated mix of pride and anxiety. The partial scholarship he'd earned covered only about 40% of the considerable tuition. As I reviewed the financial aid paperwork spread across our kitchen table, the numbers seemed insurmountable. "I can take out loans for the rest," James offered, noticing my furrowed brow. "No, no," I insisted, pride overriding practicality. "I'll figure something out. Your mother would want you to graduate debt-free." What I didn't say was how financially drained I already felt from Tiffany's endless expenses. The shopping trips, the cheerleading camps, the European language program she had insisted was essential for her future. James's education would require additional weekend shifts and postponing necessary home repairs, but I committed nonetheless. What I couldn't resist, however, was reminding James repeatedly of the sacrifice. "You know, this semester's tuition payment means I can't replace the truck this year," I mentioned as I wrote the first check. Or, "I've had to pick up extra shifts to cover your textbooks this month." Each comment was met with the same response: a quiet "thank you, Dad," and a look of guilt that should have never been there. I was placing the burden of my financial choices on his shoulders, making him feel responsible for my struggle. Meanwhile, Tiffany selected a mid-tier state college, known more for its social scene than academics. Despite her mediocre grades, I never questioned funding her education completely. There were no comments about sacrifice when I paid her sorority dues or covered the security deposit on the off-campus apartment she insisted was necessary after just one semester in the dorms. "Daddy, I simply cannot focus with all those other girls around," she explained during Christmas break of her freshman year. "I need my own space to really apply myself." The applying herself primarily involved elaborate themed parties and minimal class attendance, evidenced by her academic probation notices that she casually dismissed. Yet I continued funding her lifestyle without complaint, while scrutinizing every expense related to James's education. James rarely came home during college. He would call occasionally with brief updates, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that I mistook for contentment. When he did visit for holidays, the distance between us was palpable. Our conversations became superficial exchanges of pleasantries rather than meaningful connections. During his junior year, I received a tuition statement that revealed James had changed his major from engineering to business with a focus on finance. I was furious. Engineering guaranteed a stable, lucrative career. Exactly what I wanted for my son. Business seemed risky, undefined. I called him immediately, my voice rising as I demanded an explanation. "You can't just throw away 2 years of engineering coursework on a whim, James. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to pay for your education? What were you thinking?" There was a long pause before he replied, his voice calm despite my outburst. "I've transferred all my credits, Dad. It won't delay graduation or cost any extra. I found I have an aptitude for financial markets, and the business school offers better internship opportunities." Better opportunities. Engineering is a guaranteed career path. This is completely irresponsible. I want you to go to the registrar tomorrow and switch back. Another pause, longer this time. "I appreciate everything you've done for me," James said finally. but I need to make this decision for myself. I'll handle it from here." "Handle what?" "The additional tuition when you have to stay an extra year. The job search when you graduate with a useless degree. I won't need extra time, and I've already secured an internship for next summer. Please trust me on this." The conversation ended with my ultimatum that he reconsider or risk losing my financial support. James never brought up the subject again, and I assumed he had returned to engineering. My stubbornness prevented me from asking directly, and his reticence to engage in conflict meant the subject remained closed. During this time, Tiffany skillfully widened the rift between James and me. She would casually mention how seldom he called or visited, implying ingratitude. "It's like he doesn't even appreciate all you've done for him, Daddy," she would say during our weekly phone calls. "I tell everyone how you're working overtime to put him through that expensive university, while he never even calls to say thank you." Her subtle manipulations painted James as the villain, and herself as the appreciative, loving daughter. I absorbed these narratives without questioning their accuracy or her motivation. My resentment toward James grew with each of Tiffany's comments, each reinforcing my perception of his ingratitude compared to her apparent devotion. What I couldn't see then was that James's independence wasn't defiance. It was adaptation. He had learned early that relying on me meant perpetual disappointment, so he had simply stopped relying on me at all. His determination to handle things himself wasn't rejection, it was self-preservation. During his final semester, our relationship consisted of monthly phone calls lasting less than 5 minutes, and the regular tuition payments I made directly to the university. I knew almost nothing about his daily life, his friendships, or his aspirations. My son had become a stranger, and I had no one to blame but myself. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon as I was finishing up at the construction site. Tiffany's name flashed on my phone screen, her third call that day. I stepped away from the noise of heavy machinery to answer. "Daddy, he proposed." Tiffany's voice pierced through the line, bubbling with excitement. "Bradley proposed last night at Maison Laurent. The ring is absolutely gorgeous, 3 carats at least." Bradley Hamilton was the son of a successful commercial real estate developer in Grand Rapids. They had been dating for just under a year, a whirlwind romance that seemed primarily fueled by Bradley's family wealth and Tiffany's enthusiasm for accessing it. I had met him twice, a polite enough young man who seemed entirely captivated by my daughter's charm. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart," I said, genuinely happy for her excitement, even as I worried about the practicalities. "Have you thought about dates yet?" "We're thinking June, just 3 months away. I know it's soon, but Bradley's family is planning to expand their business to Europe in the fall, and we want to have the wedding before that happens." 3 months. My stomach tightened at the implied costs of a rushed, elaborate wedding. I had just finished paying for Tiffany's 5-year undergraduate journey, complete with 2 major changes, and was focused on James's final semester tuition payment. Those concerns proved entirely justified when Tiffany began outlining her vision, a ceremony at St. Michael's Cathedral reception for 200 guests at the Grand Riverfront Hotel, designer gown, 5 bridesmaids custom floral arrangements, top-shelf open bar, and a live 12-piece orchestra. "Bradley's parents are covering the rehearsal dinner and honeymoon," she added, as if this represented equal financial contribution to the estimated $80,000 event she was describing. When I gently suggested scaling back certain elements, Tiffany's voice instantly transformed from jubilant to wounded. "Daddy, this is my special day. I've dreamed about this since I was a little girl. Mom would have wanted me to have the perfect wedding." The invocation of Sarah was a calculated move one Tiffany had perfected over the years. My late wife became a prop in her emotional arsenal, deployed whenever she needed to neutralize my financial concerns. It worked every time, including now. "You're right, princess. We'll make it work somehow." And somehow I did, leveraging my home equity, deferring much-needed medical procedures, and taking on consulting jobs that left me exhausted, all while still needing to make James's final tuition payment of $8,000. As the wedding planning consumed Tiffany's every waking moment, and my every spare dollar, I received a brief text from James about his upcoming final schedule, and a job interview that conflicted with Tiffany's wedding date. "I have final exams the week before, and an interview with Goldman Sachs in Chicago that cannot be rescheduled." His message read. I'll try to make arrangements, but I might not be able to attend the wedding. When I called him, agitation coloring my voice, James calmly explained the situation. His finance program's final exams were scheduled through the day before the wedding, and the interview opportunity was extraordinarily competitive. This is your sister's wedding, James, I said, my frustration mounting. Family comes first. You can reschedule an interview. Dad, this isn't just any interview. This is potentially my entire career. They're only seeing 5 candidates from across the country. And Tiffany only gets one wedding day? She'll be devastated if you're not there. I've poured everything into making this special for her. The conversation deteriorated from there. I reminded James of the sacrifices I'd made for his education, the financial strain his tuition had placed on me while planning this wedding. My voice rose as I delivered what I thought was my trump card. If you can't be bothered to attend your sister's wedding, then maybe I shouldn't be bothered to make your final tuition payment. That $8,000 would certainly help with the catering bill. The silence that followed felt loaded with tension. When James finally spoke, his voice was unnervingly calm. Dad, you don't need to pay for anything anymore. His response confused me. Was he dropping out weeks before graduation planning to take out last-minute loans? Or worse, expecting me to cover Tiffany's expenses while sacrificing my own financial stability? What's that supposed to mean? I demanded. It means I've got it covered. Don't worry about the tuition. His dismissive tone ignited something primal in me. A father's rage at perceived disrespect, a provider's indignation at having his sacrifice dismissed. Listen to me very carefully, James. Be at your sister's wedding or you're on your own completely. I mean it. After everything I've done for you, this is non-negotiable. Another pause, this one briefer. I understand your position, he said finally. I won't ask for anything else. I hung up feeling victorious yet unsettled. James hadn't argued or pleaded. He hadn't promised to attend or expressed any concern about losing financial support. His equanimity in the face of my threat was puzzling, almost as if the leverage I thought I held had no value at all. When I told Tiffany about the conversation expecting her to be concerned about her brother's potential absence, she instead focused entirely on her perceived victimhood. That's so typical of James, she huffed, always thinking he's too good for family obligations. Making my special day all about him and his career. Well, if he can't be bothered to show up, then he doesn't deserve to be in the wedding photos anyway. Her reaction should have given me pause, but instead, it reinforced my perception that James was being selfish. I sent the tuition check that weekend, telling myself it was the right thing to do despite James's attitude. I included a note reminding him of the wedding date and his obligation to attend. He never acknowledged receiving either. As the wedding approached and RSVPs flowed in without one from James, my anger solidified into righteousness. I had done everything for both my children, and while Tiffany showed proper appreciation, James could not even perform this one simple act of family solidarity. The narrative fit so neatly into my established view that I never questioned its accuracy. What I failed to consider was why James, always the responsible one, would risk his education over a single day's event. I never asked myself what his calm acceptance of my threat might actually mean. I was too busy playing the role of Tiffany's devoted father to consider that I might be completely wrong about my son. June arrived with perfect weather for Tiffany's extravagant wedding day. The cathedral stood majestically against the clear blue Michigan sky, as guests in formal attire filed in, admiring the elaborate floral arrangements that adorned every surface. I stood in the vestibule greeting family members and friends with forced smiles while checking my watch and phone repeatedly. No sign of James, no calls, no texts, no apologies. Tiffany was sequestered in the bride's room, surrounded by her bridesmaids, makeup artists, and photographers documenting every moment of her preparation. When I visited briefly, she immediately asked the question I'd been dreading. Is James here yet? When I shook my head, her eyes welled with tears that threatened to ruin her carefully applied makeup. I knew he wouldn't come. He's always been jealous of me, Daddy. He's trying to ruin my perfect day because he can't stand that you love me more. The makeup artist rushed to blot her tears while shooting me an accusatory look as if I were responsible for this crisis. I retreated quickly, promising to handle it, though what exactly that meant I couldn't say. As guests continued to arrive, I found myself repeatedly explaining James's absence to questioning relatives. "Where's your boy, Vernon?" my brother asked as we shook hands. "Haven't seen him in ages." "He couldn't make it," I replied stiffly. "Work commitments." The lie came easily, protecting both my pride and Tiffany's narrative. I couldn't bear to admit that my son had chosen to defy me to miss this important family occasion, despite my ultimatum. Each time I repeated the excuse, my resentment toward James grew. By the time the ceremony began, I had transformed from anxious to angry. As I walked Tiffany down the aisle, her arm linked through mine, I focused on her radiant smile, rather than the empty space in the front row where James should have been. She was a vision in her designer gown, and the audible gasps from the assembled guests validated every dollar spent. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. Tiffany and Bradley exchanged personalized vows that made several guests dab at their eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs provided in welcome baskets. As I watched my daughter pledge her life to this man, a strange hollowness expanded in my chest. The perfect wedding was unfolding exactly as planned, yet something essential was missing. At the reception, Tiffany's distress over James's absence evolved from private tears to public performance. "I just wish my brother could have been here to share this special day," she said repeatedly to guests, her voice catching dramatically each time. "Family means everything to me." I played my part as well, accepting condolences for my son's absence, as if he had committed an unforgivable transgression. After several glasses of expensive whiskey, my performance became increasingly convincing. "I'm done supporting an ungrateful son," I declared loudly to my cousin Paul during the father-daughter dance. "A man who can't be bothered to attend his sister's wedding doesn't deserve my help anymore." As the evening progressed and my inebriation deepened, I left multiple voicemails on James's phone, each more aggressive than the last. "You've made your choice, James," I slurred into the phone from a quiet corner of the reception hall. "Don't expect anything from me ever again. You're on your own now. Completely." I was so absorbed in my righteous indignation that I nearly missed the curious exchange between Bradley's parents at the adjacent table. I had just returned from leaving another angry message when I overheard Mrs. Hamilton's puzzled voice. "I thought Vernon's son worked at Goldman Sachs in Chicago. Bradley mentioned something about him being some kind of financial prodigy." Mr. Hamilton shushed her quickly. "Different situation entirely, Martha. Let's not discuss it here." Their comments made no sense to me in my alcohol-addled state. James was still in university, struggling through a business degree. He shouldn't have chosen, dependent on my financial support. The Hamiltons must have confused him with someone else. As the reception wound down and guests departed with custom favor boxes, I found myself in a quiet moment with Bradley's father, Richard. Determined to correct whatever misunderstanding existed, I broached the subject. "James is finishing his degree this summer." I explained, my words slightly slurred. "Engineering or business, something like that." Richard Hamilton gave me a strange look, a mixture of confusion and something that might have been pity. "I see," he replied carefully. "Well, congratulations on the beautiful wedding, Vernon. Tiffany and Bradley make a lovely couple." His quick change of subject left me feeling dismissed and increasingly confused. What did the Hamiltons know about my son that I didn't? The question lingered uncomfortably as I watched Tiffany and Bradley depart in a shower of rose petals bound for their 3-week European honeymoon that I suspected was costing the Hamiltons far less than this wedding had cost me. Alone in my hotel room that night, I drunkenly renewed my vow to cut James off completely. He had made his choice. I had made sacrifices his entire life, and this was how he repaid me. The betrayal felt complete, justified, and irreversible. What I didn't realize was that the true betrayal in this situation was entirely my own, not just on this day, but over decades of blind favoritism and emotional neglect. The revelation waiting for me would shatter the convenient narrative I had built around both my children, forcing me to confront the father I had actually been, rather than the one I pretended to be. 2 weeks after Tiffany's wedding, I was still nursing my resentment toward James while struggling to manage the substantial debt I'd accumulated. The stack of bills on my kitchen table grew daily, catering, balance venue, final payment, photographer, florist. The numbers blurred together in an overwhelming sum that would take years to repay. Amid this financial anxiety, arrived a cream-colored envelope with formal typography, bearing James's name in the return address. I opened it, expecting perhaps an apology, or at least an explanation for his absence. What I found instead changed everything. It was a graduation announcement from the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. According to the enclosed information, James had not only completed his degree, but had graduated summa cum laude, top of his class. The date of commencement was 2 weeks before Tiffany's wedding. I stared at the announcement in confusion. This made no sense. James should have been in his final semester when Tiffany got married. I had just paid his spring tuition. How could he have already graduated? Enclosed with the announcement was a program from the business school's honor ceremony, listing James as the recipient of the prestigious Baker Scholar Award for academic excellence. There was also a newspaper clipping from the financial section of the Chicago Tribune, featuring a group photo of business competition winners. James stood in the center, accepting an oversized check for $50,000 for his investment strategy proposal. My confusion turned to shock when I saw the date on the newspaper. 4 months ago. The article mentioned that James had already accepted a position at Goldman Sachs with a starting salary well into 6 figures. The position would begin immediately after graduation. Goldman Sachs. The interview he couldn't reschedule. The job Bradley's parents had mentioned at the wedding. My hand shook as I reached for my phone and dialed James's number. The call went straight to voicemail, as did my next 5 attempts. Increasingly desperate, I sent text messages that showed as delivered but received no response. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove the 2 hours to Ann Arbor, determined to find James at his campus apartment. When I arrived, I found the building manager overseeing the cleaning of an empty unit. James Wilson. Yeah, he moved out right after graduation, the manager informed me. Model tenant. Place was spotless when he left. Did he leave a forwarding address? This is urgent family business. The manager shook his head. All I know is he took a job in Chicago. Said he was starting right away. Increasingly desperate, I drove to the business school administration office, claiming a family emergency to get information about James. The sympathetic receptionist connected me with Dr. Eleanor Patterson, who identified herself as James's academic advisor. Mr. Wilson, what can I help you with? She asked, gesturing for me to sit in her office. Is everything all right with James? I need to find my son, I said, my voice strained. There seems to be some confusion about his graduation and current whereabouts. Dr. Patterson looked puzzled. James graduated 2 weeks ago with highest honors. He's been an exemplary student throughout his time here. I'm sure he's already started at Goldman Sachs in Chicago as planned. That's not possible, I insisted. I just paid his final semester tuition. He was supposed to graduate this summer. The advisor's expression shifted from confusion to uncomfortable realization. Mr. Wilson James has been on full academic scholarship since the end of his freshman year. His tuition has been covered completely for the past 3 years. The room seemed to tilt slightly as I processed this information. That's not right. I've been sending checks to the university every semester. Dr. Patterson typed briefly on her computer. According to our records, those payments were returned to the sender each time starting 3 years ago. Returned, I never received any return checks. I can't speak to that, but I can tell you James has been financially independent throughout most of his time here. He worked 3 jobs simultaneously while maintaining a perfect GPA. Quite remarkable, actually. 3 jobs, I repeated numbly. Yes. He tutored underclassmen, worked at the investment lab, and consulted for a local startup. Not to mention the competitions he won. The faculty still talks about his presentation at the investment forum last year. As Dr. Patterson continued detailing my son's extraordinary accomplishments, a terrible understanding began to dawn. James had been financially independent for years. He had returned my tuition payments I had never seen returned. He had excelled beyond anyone's expectations, while I remained completely unaware, still believing he needed my reluctant financial support. Did James ever mention any difficulties with his family? I asked finally, my voice barely audible. Dr. Patterson hesitated, professional discretion warring with obvious concern. Mr. Wilson James rarely discussed personal matters. What I can tell you is that he worked incredibly hard often, to the point of exhaustion. When I suggested he might reduce his workload, he simply said he was used to being self-sufficient. The words struck like physical blows. Self-sufficient. Because I had taught him from childhood that his needs came second, that his accomplishments didn't merit the same celebration as his sister's mediocrity, that my support came with conditions and complaints. I thanked Dr. Patterson and left the campus in a daze, fragments of realization crashing together in my mind. The Hamiltons had known more about my son's achievements than I did. James hadn't needed my final tuition payment. He had likely never needed any of them. My ultimatum about the wedding had been meaningless leverage against a son who had outgrown his need for my support years ago. But the most painful question remained unanswered: if the university had been returning my tuition payments for years, where had that money gone? It took me 3 days to track down James's address in Chicago, through a former colleague whose son worked at Goldman Sachs. I made the 4-hour drive on a Saturday morning, rehearsing what I would say the entire way. Explanations, justifications, and apologies tangled together in my mind, none seeming adequate for the magnitude of my failure. The address led me to a luxury apartment building in downtown Chicago, with a doorman and marble lobby. This was not student housing or a starter apartment. This was the residence of someone with substantial means. "I'm here to see James Wilson," I told the doorman, who regarded me skeptically in my worn jeans and work shirt. "Your name, sir?" "Vernon Wilson. I'm his father." The doorman's expression remained neutral as he made a call. After a brief exchange, he directed me to the 11th floor. Standing before apartment 1108, I felt an unfamiliar sensation, nervousness about facing my own son. I knocked, and moments later the door opened to reveal James. At 24, my son had become a man I barely recognized. Gone was the hunched posture of someone trying to disappear. This James stood straight, confident, dressed in casual but clearly expensive clothes. His eyes registered surprise at my unexpected visit, but his composure remained intact. "Dad," he said simply, "this is unexpected." "I got your graduation announcement," I replied awkwardly. "May I come in?" He hesitated briefly before stepping aside. The apartment was modern, spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Minimalist furniture, tasteful art, and neat bookshelves filled the space, nothing like the cluttered temporary quarters of a recent graduate. "Congratulations on graduating," I offered lamely, standing awkwardly in his living room. "Top of your class. That's quite an achievement." "Thank you," James replied, his tone polite but guarded. "And Goldman Sachs. That's impressive." "Yes, I started last month." The conversation stalled, weighted by years of unspoken truths. I had rehearsed this moment for hours, yet faced with my son's reserved dignity, my prepared speech evaporated. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally blurted out. "About the scholarship, the awards, the job. Why let me believe you still needed tuition payments?" James studied me for a long moment before gesturing toward the couch. As we sat a respectful distance between us, he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Would you have believed me?" he asked quietly. "You were so convinced I was making a mistake switching to business, so certain I'd fail without your guidance. Would you have accepted my success if it didn't fit your narrative?" His questions hit with precision, targeting vulnerabilities I hadn't known existed. "I visited your academic advisor," I admitted. "She said you've been on scholarship for years, that my tuition checks were being returned." "They were. I never received them, James." He met my gaze directly. "Because I was depositing them." "You were what?" "I've been depositing them into a retirement account in your name," he said evenly. "Every check you sent thinking it was going toward my tuition has been invested in a diversified portfolio designed to support you after retirement." The revelation stunned me into silence. While I had been grudgingly writing checks complaining about the burden, my son had been secretly securing my future. "But why?" I managed finally. "Why not just tell me you didn't need the money?" James was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice carried the weight of years of silent pain. "Because every time you wrote one of those checks, you reminded me what a burden I was to you. How much you sacrificed for me, unlike for Tiffany. I tried telling you once about the scholarship, but you were so busy with Tiffany's sorority crisis that you literally walked away mid-conversation. The memory surfaced immediately. Tiffany calling in tears about some social slight, me holding up a hand to silence James as he tried to share some news. I had completely forgotten the incident. How many others like it had there been? After a while, James continued, it just seemed easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe. You needed to see yourself as the sacrificing father, and I needed to stop expecting you to actually see me. James, do you know why I wasn't at Tiffany's wedding? He interrupted, an edge entering his voice for the first time. It wasn't just the job interview, though, that was real. It was because I couldn't bear to watch you bankrupt yourself for her one-day celebration, while you counted every penny spent on my education. An education I was paying for myself while working 3 jobs and maintaining perfect grades. His words stripped away the comfortable illusions I had maintained about my parenting. The contrast he described was stark, undeniable, and damning. The interview was scheduled months in advance, he continued. It represented everything I'd worked for, my chance to prove that I could succeed on my own terms. And when I told you I couldn't attend the wedding, your immediate response wasn't concern about this critical opportunity. It was a threat. Conditional love as always. That's not fair, I protested weakly. I didn't know. What didn't you know, Dad? That I was an actual person with goals and needs, that I had value beyond how I reflected on you. You never tried to know me, not once in all these years. I had no defense against the quiet devastation in his voice, the silent stretch between us filled with 2 decades of misunderstanding and neglect. I didn't need you to pay my way, Dad, James said finally, his voice softening slightly. I just needed you to believe in me, the way you always believed in her. The simplicity of his statement broke something open inside me. All those years my son hadn't wanted my money, or even my sacrifice. He had only wanted the one thing I had given Tiffany without reservation, my belief in his worth. Sitting in his impressive apartment faced with evidence of his extraordinary success, achieved entirely without my support, I finally saw the extent of my failure. Not as a provider, but as a father. I had one son who had achieved everything despite my neglect, and one daughter who had achieved little because of my indulgence. I'm sorry, James. I said the words entirely inadequate. I failed you completely. He nodded, neither agreeing nor forgiving, simply acknowledging the truth of my statement. It was the first honest moment we had shared in years. The drive home from Chicago was long and silent, my mind replaying every memory of James through this new lens of understanding. Each recollection revealed my blindness, my favoritism, my complete failure to see my son for who he truly was. By the time I arrived home, exhaustion and shame had hollowed me out completely. The next few days passed in a fog of painful realization. I moved mechanically through my routines while mentally cataloging years of inequity between my children. The evidence was everywhere, in photo albums where Tiffany featured prominently, while James appeared rarely in the saved mementos of Tiffany's minor accomplishments, while James's achievements went undocumented in the financial records, showing vastly different resources allocated to each child. As I struggled with these revelations, the financial consequences of Tiffany's wedding began to materialize in earnest. Credit card bills arrived with staggering balances. The home equity loan payment took a substantial chunk of my monthly income. Medical bills I'd been deferring arrived with final notice warnings. Meanwhile, Tiffany and Bradley's social media accounts displayed their lavish European honeymoon. Private yacht excursions in Santorini, luxury hotel suites in Paris, shopping bags from designer boutiques in Milan. When they returned, Tiffany called not to thank me for the wedding, but to ask if I would help with the down payment on a house they were considering. Bradley's parents are contributing, but we need a bit more to get the one we really want, she explained, as if this request were perfectly reasonable after the fortune I'd just spent on her wedding. For the first time, I didn't immediately agree to her demands. The contrast between my children had become too stark to ignore. While James had secretly invested money for my retirement, Tiffany was asking for more after everything I'd already given. I can't right now, Tiffany, I said finally. The wedding expenses have put me in a difficult position. Her response was immediate and familiar. wounded disbelief followed by emotional manipulation. I can't believe you're saying no to me, Daddy. After everything I've been through losing Mom, this house means everything to me. The tactics that had worked flawlessly for years suddenly rang hollow. I recognized the performance for what it was, a strategy she had perfected because it always succeeded. I'm sorry, but the answer is no, I repeated, surprising both of us. Tiffany's voice turned cold. Fine. I guess I know where I stand now. The call ended abruptly, and I felt a strange mixture of guilt and liberation. For the first time, I had set a boundary with my daughter. It felt terrifying and necessary. The stress of financial pressures combined with my emotional turmoil eventually manifested physically. 3 weeks after my visit to James, I collapsed at work with chest pains severe enough to send me to the emergency room. It wasn't a heart attack, the doctors assured me, but severe anxiety combined with exhaustion and high blood pressure. You need to reduce your stress levels immediately, the doctor advised as I lay in the hospital bed. Your body is sending you a very clear warning. I was scheduled for discharge the following morning when an unexpected visitor arrived. James stood in the doorway of my hospital room, his expression a mixture of concern and hesitation. The hospital called me as your emergency contact, he explained, stepping cautiously into the room. Are you okay? The sight of my son appearing despite everything broken between us unleashed something. For the first time since Sarah's funeral, I broke down completely, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. James stood awkwardly for a moment before moving to sit in the chair beside my bed. I'm sorry, I managed between breaths. For everything, James. I'm so sorry. He didn't offer immediate forgiveness or platitudes. Instead, he simply sat with me as I worked through the emotion, offering a tissue when the worst had passed. The doctor says it's not serious, I said, finally wiping my face. Stress and exhaustion. James nodded. Wedding bills, among other things. He glanced at the paperwork on my bedside table. Medical forms mixed with collection notices I'd been reviewing before my collapse. Let me help you organize this, he offered, and I recognized it as the olive branch it was. Over the next several hours, as we waited for my discharge, James methodically sorted through my financial situation. His expertise was evident as he quickly assessed the extent of my debt-prioritized payments and outlined a sustainable recovery plan. There was no judgment in his analysis, just practical problem solving. You need to sell the house, he said finally. It's too much for one person, and the equity could clear most of these high-interest debts. The thought of selling the family home was painful, but liberating. It had become more mausoleum than haven filled with memories of Sarah and the family we had once been. You're right, I agreed. It's time. As James drove me home from the hospital, a fragile new connection formed between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of something rebuilt from the ruins of our relationship. We talked cautiously about neutral topics. The Tiger's current season changes to the neighborhood, a new construction project I'd been overseeing. Over the following weeks, this tentative reconnection continued. James would call occasionally to check on my health and the progress of my financial reorganization. I began asking genuine questions about his work and life in Chicago, learning about the sophisticated financial strategies he developed, the colleagues he respected, and the community service he participated in during his limited free time. Each conversation revealed a son I had never truly known, thoughtful, brilliant, and far more compassionate than I deserved. The more I learned about James, the more I recognized how extraordinary he was and how completely I had failed to nurture these qualities. Simultaneously, my relationship with Tiffany underwent a seismic shift. My continued refusal to provide additional financial support after the wedding triggered increasingly dramatic responses. Tearful phone calls escalated to accusations of abandonment, eventually culminating in Bradley calling to suggest I was destroying their marriage with my sudden withdrawal of support. Tiffany's used to a certain level of backing from you, he explained uncomfortably. She feels like you've changed the rules without warning. The truth was, I had changed. Or rather, I had finally seen the truth about both my children. The revelation forced me to establish boundaries I should have set decades earlier. When Tiffany realized the emotional manipulations that had always worked in the past were no longer effective, she simply stopped calling. The contrast between my children had never been clearer. James, who had every reason to abandon me to my self-created problems, offered practical assistance without conditions. Tiffany, who had received everything I had to give, and more, disappeared the moment I stopped providing additional resources. As the months passed, I sold the family home and moved into a comfortable but modest condo closer to my work. The proceeds cleared my debts and established a small emergency fund. James helped me set up automatic contributions to the retirement account he had secretly been funding for years, an account that already contained a substantial sum. When I expressed my discomfort about accepting this money, James shook his head. "It was always meant for you, Dad. I just needed to make sure it would be there when you needed it, protected from other demands." The gentle reference to Tiffany's constant financial drain wasn't lost on me. With James's guidance, I also found a position with a commercial development firm that utilized my experience while being less physically demanding than construction work. The role came with better benefits and more sustainable hours, allowing me time to focus on my health and personal growth. Throughout this transformation, I began to understand a fundamental truth I had missed for decades: enabling is not love. Every time I had catered to Tiffany's demands without accountability, I wasn't showing her greater affection. I was preventing her growth. Every time I had overlooked James's needs or achievements, assuming his independence meant he required less support, I wasn't respecting his strength. I was abandoning my responsibilities as his father. True love, I was learning painfully late, meant seeing your children for who they actually are, not who you need them to be. It meant celebrating their authentic strengths rather than rewarding performances designed to manipulate. It meant holding them accountable while providing genuine support. My relationship with James would never be what it could have been if I had been a better father from the beginning. Too many formative years had been squandered, too many opportunities for connection missed. But we were building something new from the ashes of my failures. A relationship based on honest communication, mutual respect, and the acknowledgement of past wrongs. Tiffany remained distant, connecting only when financial needs arose. Each time I maintained my boundaries, she withdrew further. It was painful to recognize that without my wallet as an incentive, my daughter had little interest in maintaining a relationship with me. Yet I held on to hope that someday, once she recognized the enabling pattern had truly ended, we might develop a healthier connection. The greatest lesson from this painful journey came from James, who, despite years of being secondary in my attention, had developed into a man of extraordinary character. His success wasn't measured by the impressive salary or prestigious position, but by his integrity, compassion, and resilience. These qualities had flourished not because of my parenting, but despite its absence. Sometimes the children we understand the least are the ones who have the most to teach us. My son, who I had failed to truly see for most of his life, ultimately showed me what genuine strength looks like. Not the loud demands for attention that I had mistaken for need, but the quiet dignity of someone who builds themselves without expectation of recognition. True love sometimes means letting go of the narrative we've created about our children and seeing them for who they really are, even when that revelation shows us the depth of our own failures. If you found something valuable in my story today, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever discovered something important about someone close to you that completely changed your perspective? Share your experience in the comments below. Remember, it's never too late to acknowledge our mistakes and begin rebuilding what we've damaged. Thank you for listening to my journey from blindness to painful clarity.